7 words, one open mic, and a nation that wasn't supposed to hear. Pam Bondi thought the cameras were off, that no one would catch what she said about Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez when the hearing went into recess. But the mic stayed on. What followed wasn't a shouting match. It wasn't a press war. It was something far more powerful. Silence, patience, and then one moment of undeniable truth. AOC didn't fire back. She didn't raise her voice. She waited, and when the time was right, she let Bondi's own voice do the damage. What happens when the most powerful weapon in the room isn't a soundbite, but dignity? What happens when America stops talking and starts listening? This is a dramatized story, fictional in detail but emotionally real. The characters, names, and events are part of a crafted narrative meant to reflect deeper truths about class, power, and respect in our public life. Because sometimes it's the words we don't expect that echo the loudest. Capitol Hill, 7:58 a.m. The sky over Washington, D.C. was still holding on to its silver haze, the kind that settles just before a political storm. Down Constitution Avenue, black sedans and unmarked SUVs pulled up in rhythm, unloading aides in suits too crisp for comfort. A few blocks away, the media trucks had already started feeding live footage to breakfast anchors coast to coast. Inside room 226 of the Dirksen Senate office building, the air was cooler than expected. Not from the marble, but from expectation. The press rail was unusually full. Every seat taken, elbows brushing, whispered names passing between journalists like contraband. C-SPAN, PBS, MSNBC, even a few podcast microphones poking out from under notepads. All eyes turned when Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez entered the chamber alone. She didn't glance at the cameras, didn't smile, just walked quietly to her seat, placed her leather-bound pad on the desk, and folded her hands. Her outfit, a sharp navy blazer over a muted ivory blouse, was chosen not for drama, but for gravity. She didn't need color to stand out. The stillness did it for her. No scrolling, no chatting, just presence. A young camera tech leaned in to his producer. "She's early." "She's always early," the producer muttered. "That's when she's dangerous." Moments later, a low wave of murmurs rolled through the chamber like a breeze before thunder. Pam Bondi had arrived. Flanked by 2 senior aides, her pace was measured, polished, almost regal. She wore a sleek white blazer over pearl gray silk, her signature look when she wanted to radiate command without looking combative. The aides didn't speak, but they didn't have to. Her presence did the talking. "Here we go," someone near the back whispered. "The fire and the fuse in one room," another said. Bondi offered a closed-lipped smile to a few senators as she moved to her seat. She didn't look at AOC, not yet, but the smirk at the corner of her mouth hinted that she'd seen her. The gavel hit once. Chairman Henderson, a steady-voiced elder Democrat with a weathered face and wire-rimmed glasses, spoke. "This hearing will come to order. We convene today to discuss the ethical guidelines surrounding federal appointments, political influence, and the legal limits of undisclosed financial involvement in public service." His words were routine, but the silence afterward was not. Pam Bondi was the first to request opening remarks. Of course she was. She leaned toward the mic, posture perfect. "Mr. Chairman, thank you. I believe most Americans would agree that our public institutions are meant to inspire confidence, not controversy." Her voice was calm, familiar, the practiced cadence of a former attorney general, accustomed to press briefings and legal sparring. Unfortunately, in recent years, this chamber has seen a rise in performance, in viral sound bites, in spectacle, masquerading as civic duty. The pause she inserted afterward was surgical. Eyes drifted toward AOC, but she didn't blink. Pam Bondi continued, "This hearing isn't a stage, it's a safeguard, and I sincerely hope my colleagues approach it that way today." No name mentioned, yet every syllable pointed like a dagger. AOC remained still. Her hands moved only once, to flip open her notebook and quietly underline a single word. Restraint. No reply, no interruption, just silence. It rattled more than a shout would have. The press took note. A veteran reporter whispered to a younger colleague, "She's baiting her." But Cortez won't bite. Not yet. Bondi shifted back in her seat, the slightest tilt of victory in her shoulders. But she didn't notice what was under her desk, a small red light glowing dimly beneath the microphone's base. A light that indicated it was still on. The microphone. Still live. Still listening. Still recording. And in less than 90 minutes, it would change everything. The second gavel strike echoed sharper than the first, as if it sensed the shift in atmosphere. Testimony was scheduled. Witnesses would speak. But the tension wasn't in the files or the facts. It was in the unsaid. The way Bondi's gaze occasionally flickered sideways, and how AOC, quiet and alert, kept her pen moving in slow, deliberate strokes. Chairman Henderson yielded the floor to Bondi for questions directed at the first witness, a professor of legal ethics from the University of Chicago. But Bondi barely acknowledged the witness beyond the formalities. Her eyes and her interest were trained elsewhere. "As we consider ethics in appointments," she began, voice smooth as porcelain, "it's important we also consider the ethical tone set by those doing the questioning. For example," her eyes landed on AOC's desk, "when we use congressional time to accuse, posture, or rally hashtags instead of reviewing legal frameworks." AOC looked up, her face neutral, almost bored. She didn't speak, just jotted 2 short lines in her notebook and resumed listening to the witness, who was now nervously adjusting his glasses, clearly aware that he was no longer the focus. Bondi continued, shifting slightly in her chair to lean forward. "It's easy to criticize. It's easy to grandstand. But I'd suggest that law isn't about slogans or passion plays. It's about precedent, logic, and above all, discipline." That word, discipline, landed like a thrown glove. Still, AOC didn't flinch. She gently flipped the page of her pad, underlined a single word, pattern, then folded her hands again. Bondi smiled. It wasn't warm. "You know, I grew up watching legal scholars, not influencers, watching jurists, not social media personalities." Her tone turned softer, but not kinder. "This body was never meant to be a stage for reinvention. It's not a ladder. It's a duty." A small, dry chuckle echoed from the far end of the dais. Bondi glanced down the line, found no reprimand, and added one more barb with a flourish. "You don't beat law with slogans, sweetheart." That word, the one she always used when she thought she was being genteel but wasn't, hung in the air like smog. The room didn't gasp. It didn't need to. Everyone heard it. Everyone knew what it meant. AOC looked up. She didn't blink fast, didn't inhale sharply. She simply adjusted her chair forward by an inch, picked up her pen again, and this time wrote a full sentence in silence. Then she turned to the witness and asked, voice steady and deliberate, "Professor, would you consider the use of personal background to diminish a colleague's authority as a breach of ethical neutrality in public service?" The professor stammered, caught off guard, then nodded slowly. "Yes, in context, it can reflect implicit bias and contribute to a toxic institutional tone. Even if done through indirect remarks?" AOC pressed. "Yes, especially then." "Thank you," she said calmly, turning her attention back to the committee. "We often speak of law as cold, logical, above personal grievance. But law without dignity, without recognition of who it serves, isn't justice. It's procedure. No theatrics, no raised voice, just clarity, carved like marble." Bondi didn't respond. Not directly. She flipped through her briefing folder a little faster than before. Her smile faltered, but didn't disappear entirely. Chairman Henderson cleared his throat. "Let's remain focused on the hearing's objective." But the moment had already landed. Not loud, not viral, yet, but felt. Somewhere above the press rail, a journalist tapped her phone screen and whispered, "That might be the line of the day." But down at the base of the witness table, still glowing, the red light under Bondi's mic remained steadily lit. It had heard the word sweetheart. It had heard everything. And what it captured, what the world would soon hear, wasn't just a policy debate. It was something older, deeper, and far more dangerous. A conflict not just between two women, but between two visions of who gets to speak in America and who still gets spoken down to. The gavel struck once more, sharp and flat, signaling a 15-minute recess. Conversations erupted instantly like carbonated air released from a shaken bottle. Some senators stretched, others leaned in for sidebar huddles. A few staffers slipped into the aisle with the instinctive swiftness of people trained to anticipate needs before they're spoken. Pam Bondi stood with deliberate ease. She reached for her folder, smoothing the edges as if straightening paper could straighten the tension still hanging in the air. Her smile returned, not the one she wore on camera, but the one she saved for corridors and back rooms. The practiced, private kind. AOC remained seated, still, focused. She sipped quietly from a water bottle and flipped back through her legal pad, rereading her own notes like they were old letters she had already memorized. She wasn't watching Bondi. She didn't need to. She already knew the exit cues, the subtle clack of designer heels, the hushed voices of two aides, the frictionless glide of someone used to walking out of a room believing she'd won it. As Bondi stepped off the platform and into the corridor behind the chamber, the cameras cut away. Viewers at home saw a wide shot of the committee room, emptying and murmuring like a settling storm. But inside the chamber, tucked beneath the sleek oak paneling where Bondi's nameplate had just rested, a tiny red LED still glowed. Her microphone, hidden discreetly beneath the surface, remained active. In the hallway, Bondi's voice carried just enough for the wrong person to hear. Not a shout, not even a sentence she intended to land. Just a muttered exhale of disdain, said as one might toss a gum wrapper into a bin. Let her rant. They love it when the waitress acts like she runs the place. She didn't even slow down, just kept walking, not realizing the statement had already been archived, not by a camera, but by something far more ruthless, an open mic and a digital system with auto backup. Inside the adjacent tech booth, where only 3 people were allowed access, a 26-year-old sound technician named Luis Morales froze. He'd heard it. He wasn't supposed to be listening. Not really. His job was levels, clarity, muting feeds between sessions. But his headphones were still on, and the signal hadn't dropped yet. He stared at the waveform dancing across the soundboard display, the audio line that registered Bondi's voice clearly, too clearly. Luis had grown up in the Bronx, not far from where AOC had walked blocks to campaign back when she was just that bartender with the clipboard. He remembered how his abuela cried when AOC won her first race, said it felt like someone finally climbed the fence instead of just rattling it. Now that same woman, mocked, minimized, had just been called a waitress in the most condescending, performative tone Luis had heard in years. And it wasn't just the word. It was the venom tucked behind it. The way they love it sounded like those people, even if it wasn't said aloud. He hovered over the keyboard. The system was set to flush temp audio files at the top of the hour. But with one key command, he could preserve the clip, tag it, encrypt it. His hand trembled slightly, not from fear, but weight, from knowing that this wasn't just hot gossip or an out-of-context soundbite. This was intent, exposed. A truth slipped out by accident. He hit the shortcut, Shift plus F9. The clip saved under a single label, Bondi hotmic.wav. He didn't forward it. Not yet. He didn't say anything. But as he slid off his headphones and leaned back in his chair, his heart pounded like a drum line beneath a calm surface, because he knew what few others did in that moment. The mic never cared about timing. The mic had no loyalty. The mic was always on. And sometimes the most powerful voice in the room is the one that wasn't meant to be heard. Luis didn't sleep that night. Not really. He went home with his backpack slung low and his hoodie up, taking the metro instead of his usual rideshare. Headphones in, but not playing music. The streets of DC blurred past the window, but his mind was locked on a single audio file stored in an encrypted folder on a flash drive in his jacket pocket. He played it back twice before midnight, once on his laptop with the volume low, and once through earbuds, just to be sure it was as clear as he remembered. It was. Pam Bondi's voice came through with surgical precision. Let her rant. They love it when the waitress acts like she runs the place. Every word sharp, every vowel cutting. It didn't even need context to sting. The arrogance was self-contained. He could have leaked it to a major outlet. He knew someone at MSNBC, another guy at Vox who owed him a favor. But Luis didn't want a polished headline or a six-panel debate segment. He wanted it to reach people raw, before the spin started, before anyone had time to dress it up or bury it beneath a polished statement. So he made a call. Rebecca Tran, editor and creator of a rising independent YouTube channel called Civic Signal, picked up on the second ring. Luis didn't waste time with pleasantries, just said, "Becca, I have something." I don't think she knew the mic was on. 10 minutes later, they were on a private call over Signal, encrypted end-to-end. Luis uploaded the file to her secure drive. He could hear her reaction in real time. The intake of breath, the whispered, "Oh my God," the silence that followed, then the wheels turning. "This wasn't an offhand joke," Rebecca said finally. "This is cultural. It's classist. It's racial coded. It's real," Luis interrupted, "and they're gonna try to erase it." Rebecca didn't ask where it came from. She trusted Luis. She always had. They'd met at a protest during the George Floyd summer, and she knew he didn't move unless it mattered. She opened her editing suite, layered the clip over a still image of the committee room, added subtitles and a single headline. Bondi's hot mic moment, the waitress act. No music, no effects, just audio, waveform, and truth. She debated waiting until morning, but something about the clip, it couldn't wait. It felt like the kind of thing people needed to hear when they were most unguarded, scrolling in the dark, deciding whether to care again. She hit publish at 11:42 p.m. The views trickled in, 83 in the first 5 minutes, then 300, then 2,000. By 1:15 a.m., it had passed 10,000 views. At 2:08 a.m., someone on Reddit cross-posted it with the caption, "She said this about AOC on a hot mic in 2025. Unreal." By 3:30 a.m., it had reached 50,000 views and was still climbing. In the comments section, it wasn't bots or flame wars. It was truckers, teachers, librarians, ex-cops, retired factory workers. People who wrote things like, "My daughter waited tables to get through med school. Shame on her. I voted for Bondi twice. That clip made my stomach turn. She didn't say people. She said they. That's all I needed to know." Luis sat in the dark, phone in hand, the faint hum of his refrigerator the only sound in his apartment. He knew this wasn't the end of the story, not even close, but something had shifted. A crack had formed in the wall. Because what Pam Bondi said wasn't just cruel, it was familiar. And millions of Americans, many older, many quiet, many who had once been invisible, heard it for exactly what it was. Not a mistake, not a misstep, but a mirror. And now they were watching. By 6:12 a.m., the clip had crossed 200,000 views. No thumbnails, no paid boost, just one microphone, one sentence, and a wave of outrage that moved faster than sleep. The kind of outrage that didn't shout. It burned slow, then exploded when people reached for their phones with coffee still in hand. By sunrise, Twitter was a battlefield of reckoning. The top trending tags were already locked in. Hashtag #HotMcBondi, hashtag waitress with power. The hashtags told a story before the headlines caught up. Screenshots of Bondi's quote spread like brush fire, cropped, captioned, annotated. Some paired her voice with images of AOC walking the floor of Congress in her first year. Others showed side-by-side photos, Bondi at a black tie gala, AOC canvassing in the snow in the Bronx. At 7:03 a.m., a short Vox explainer dropped. At 7:21, a local AM radio station in Kansas City interrupted a farming forecast to quote the clip live on air. And at 8:06, the breakfast hour on Good Morning America cut into a segment about infrastructure to play 15 seconds of the audio, bleeped but intact. By then, the news trucks had started circling. At a bodega in the Bronx, Channel 2 found Lucia Alvarez, 72 years old, standing next to a metal shopping cart full of onions and rice. She recognized AOC from the poster still taped to the lamppost outside her apartment. She said, "Waitress," Lucia told the reporter, shaking her head. But what she meant was us. That's our voice, she mocked. That girl, she walked by my building every week when she ran. She didn't skip the Spanish names on the intercom. She knocked on all the doors. A clip of Lucia's words hit Facebook and within an hour had 250,000 views. Not because it was viral, but because it was true. The kind of truth that didn't need filters. Just faces. Meanwhile, Bondi remained silent. Her team huddled inside her Capitol office, phones buzzing on the table, aides speaking in rushed fragments. It's out of context. It wasn't official testimony. Maybe we say it was a joke? Maybe. We say it wasn't her voice. But they all knew the worst part. It was her voice. Undeniably. Unmistakably. At 9:47 a.m., her communications director finally posted a statement. Ms. Bondi regrets that a private remark made during a recess has caused offense. She believes public discourse should remain respectful and focused on policy. If anyone was offended by the comment, she offers her apologies. The damage doubled. The phrase, if anyone was offended, trended on its own by 10:10 a.m. A former congressional aide tweeted, "That's not an apology. That's a shrug with lipstick." CNN brought on a body language expert. Fox News called it political entrapment. NPR chose to air the clip again, this time paired with AOC's quiet response from the hearing the day before. In Queens, barbershops were playing the clip on loop. In Jacksonville, a veterans group issued a public letter condemning the kind of dismissive elitism that divides this country. In Milwaukee, a retired school teacher sent an email to her entire alumni group titled simply, "She forgot the mic was on, but we didn't." AOC said nothing. No tweets, no interviews. She walked into her office with a thermos and a folder and gave no comment to the crowd of reporters waiting outside. A camera caught her holding the door open for an intern. No smile, just presence. Her silence wasn't retreat. It was design. Because while Bondi's people scrambled to control the narrative, AOC let America do the talking. And America was talking loud. Not with shouts, but with old truths rising from quiet places, kitchen tables, VA clinics, laundromats, where people had been told to stay small for too long. Bondi thought she'd made an offhand comment. She hadn't. She'd opened a wound. And now the country was wide awake. The sidewalk outside Cannon House office building looked like a press pit during an inauguration. Cameras extended over barricades like metallic vines. Boom mics hovered overhead. And the pavement buzzed with the static hum of live feeds. Reporters lined up shoulder to shoulder, phones in hand, questions preloaded and rehearsed like stage lines. Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez, any response to Bondi's hot mic? Do you think her apology was sincere? Are you calling for her resignation? But Alexandria said nothing. She walked past them calmly, dressed in charcoal gray slacks and a cream blouse, her hair pulled back in a low bun. No statement in hand, no flack by her side. Only a small stack of documents and a reusable coffee thermos tucked under one arm. Her silence, sharp as a blade, sliced through the chaos louder than a megaphone ever could. The Capitol buzzed behind her. Bondi's press team had just announced a follow-up interview. The hashtags were still trending. Op-eds were already scheduled. But AOC didn't stop to perform. She walked straight to the car waiting at the curb, slipped into the back seat, and disappeared without a word. Where she went, no one from the press knew. There was no alert to the pool, no tweets, no live stream. She didn't head to MSNBC or a war room. She went home. Not to the townhouse in D.C., but to the Bronx. At 3:15 p.m., a quiet black sedan pulled up outside the Frederick Douglass Senior Center, a modest brick building with a faded green awning and no security detail in sight. Inside, bingo cards had just been cleared off the folding tables, and the usual Thursday afternoon domino match was down to 2 players. She didn't walk in like a congresswoman. She walked in like someone returning to where they were first believed in. The room went quiet, not because she asked it to, but because the people there had watched her rise like a granddaughter who made it. No one pulled out a phone. No one tried to post anything. These weren't fans. They were witnesses. Ms. Loretta, 89, in her powder pink sweater, gave her a long hug without saying a word. Mr. Russell, sitting by the window with his cane leaning against the radiator, motioned for her to sit beside him. He didn't ask about D.C. He didn't bring up microphones or headlines or press statements. He reached slowly into the inside pocket of his jacket and pulled out a folded note, written in shaky cursive on lined yellow paper. He handed it to her and said simply, "We heard it, but we already knew." She opened it. One sentence. "They never stopped talking like that. You just finally made them say it where we could all hear." AOC blinked slowly, folded the note in half, and slipped it into the side pocket of her folder, next to her father's old union ID badge. She didn't speak still, but her eyes softened. In the back of the room, someone started making tea. The television in the corner played softly, showing clips of the committee hearing on repeat. Bondi's voice, the one that wasn't supposed to be recorded, echoed faintly through the room, muted but unmistakable. Someone turned the volume down. "Let it play," Miss Loretta said, eyes still on AOC. "It don't hurt us now." They spent an hour together, talking, remembering, laughing about things that had nothing to do with Congress. Someone passed around a tin of cookies. Someone else asked if she'd ever had to unclog a garbage disposal when she bartended. She laughed, nodded, said, "Twice." Once with a steak knife someone tried to hide. It was a moment, unfilmed and unfiltered. And that was the point. Outside, the country was roaring. But in that room, in that hour, it was clear that AOC didn't need to say anything, because the people who mattered had already said it for her. And sometimes the loudest statement is the one you don't make. She walked out quietly, unnoticed, back into a world still spinning. But she wasn't retreating. She was preparing. The headlines kept multiplying, each one louder than the last. But beneath the swirl of trending tags and panel discussions, a quieter current had begun to flow, one far more dangerous for Pam Bondi than any out-of-context clip. People weren't just reacting to her words anymore. They were revisiting her record. It began with a local Florida newspaper digging through old files. Then came a flood of blog posts, think pieces, and side-by-side breakdowns. They painted a picture not with scandalous new facts, but with patterns. Decisions made in rooms no one remembered until now. In her years as Florida Attorney General, Bondi had mastered the art of polished deniability. She wasn't the firebrand yelling from podiums. She was the hand behind the curtain, quietly closing investigations, deflecting lawsuits, or delaying subpoenas just long enough for the public to forget. In 2013, she famously postponed a fraud case against a major university, just days after receiving a sizable donation from a pass tied to its founder. At the time, it barely registered beyond a few headlines. Coincidence, her office said. Political timing, her critics warned. In 2015, she'd been among the loudest voices resisting a multi-state probe into opioid manufacturers, arguing the focus should be on community education instead of litigation. Meanwhile, several of those pharmaceutical companies funneled money into re-election committees aligned with her allies. None of it had ever stuck. She was Teflon, blonde, composed, legally bulletproof. But now, in the wake of one off-mic comment, her resume didn't look like strength. It looked like insulation. Cable news filled the vacuum. CNN replayed segments of her old press conferences while MSNBC ran a chyron. From AG to agenda, Bondi's pattern of protection. Even some conservative outlets began asking cautious questions. But it wasn't just journalists doing the remembering. It was voters. People who had heard the waitress remark and now looked back through a different lens. Suddenly, that smirk wasn't just condescending, it was familiar. The way power had always spoken when it thought no one could hear. And as Bondi's legacy went on trial in the public square, another legacy reemerged, smaller, quieter, but no less impactful. A grainy video began circulating online. Shot 5 years earlier on a freezing afternoon in the Bronx, it showed Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez wearing a worn coat and fingerless gloves, her breath visible in the air as she knocked on doors. Her voice cracked from the cold, but she kept talking about rent stabilization, healthcare, dignity. A local high school student had recorded it on her phone and uploaded it with the caption, "She came to our building, no security, just her, talking to my abuela." Then came another clip. AOC outside a nursing home in Queens, holding a microphone with duct tape on the handle, speaking to a crowd of 10 people huddled under umbrellas. No press, no signs. Just her, explaining how Social Security worked and why seniors should never be shamed for needing support. That video hit 1 million views within 24 hours. People weren't just comparing resumes, they were comparing origin stories. One had risen through the polished architecture of power, donor circles, legal appointments, and TV segments framed in soft lighting. The other had walked upstairs in buildings without elevators, speaking face-to-face with people whose names didn't show up on donor rolls. The contrast was brutal, and it wasn't just millennials watching. A Florida retiree named Martin Elkins wrote in a comment under one video, "I'm 78. I don't care what party you are. One of these women served the people. The other served the powerful." The line was picked up in a New York Times editorial the next morning. Bondi's defenders scrambled to fight the optics. "She's being relitigated for doing her job," one pundit argued. "We don't punish success," said another. But the problem wasn't success. It was who benefited from it. And in that moment, the public wasn't seeing Bondi's career as impressive. They were seeing it as designed to protect itself. Meanwhile, AOC still hadn't commented. She didn't have to. The country was already rewatching the tapes. And this time, they were paying attention not to the volume, but to the values behind the voice. Across America, the clip had become more than a political moment. It had become a conversation starter, an argument igniter, a wedge driven straight through living rooms and family dinners. It was the kind of moment that didn't just trend, it lingered, it demanded response. In a modest kitchen in Scranton, Pennsylvania, steam rose from a pot of green beans while James Mallory, a 74-year-old Vietnam veteran with a cane and a crew cut, sat at the head of the table. His daughter, Kristen, leaned across from him, visibly agitated, iPad in hand. "I'm not saying she's perfect," Kristen said, tapping the screen, "but Bondi just said what a lot of people think, that AOC plays to cameras, that she's all show." James didn't look at the screen. He looked at his daughter, then at the two grandkids sitting quietly with juice boxes, listening more than they should. "She called her a waitress like it was an insult," James said calmly. "That's the part you missed." Kristen rolled her eyes. "But she was a waitress. That's not the point." "It is," James cut in. "That's the whole point. So was your mother before she finished nursing school. So was I, slinging burgers between jobs before the VA helped me. People forget how they got where they are. But I don't, and I don't want my grandkids growing up thinking working with your hands makes you less than." Kristen went quiet. Later that night, James pulled out his old Army notebook and wrote a sentence he hadn't used in years. "Respect is not given to titles. It's earned in how you carry them." Meanwhile, in Atlanta, inside the fellowship hall of Mount Olive Missionary Baptist Church, the Thursday evening Bible study had just concluded. The pastor, a silver-haired man named Reverend Coleman, sat with a group of 12 parishioners as they passed around cell phones, showing each other the clip. "No, just listen to her tone," Sister Bessie said. "That's the sound of someone used to being above folks. She didn't just say, 'waitress,' she meant beneath." "I remember when I cleaned office floors," said Deacon Elmore, adjusting his glasses. "One of the lawyers once told me I had a janitor's mouth. Same kind of smile she had in that hearing. Same kind of woman." The group nodded. They weren't political operatives. They weren't activists. They were Sunday school teachers, retired postmasters, widows who'd marched in the 60s and now use smartphones to keep up with grandchildren. Someone pressed play again. Bondi's voice echoed faintly. "They love it when the waitress acts like she runs the place." A hush fell. Then Reverend Coleman broke it. "She's not talking about Congress. She's talking about power and who's allowed to have it." By Friday morning, the clip had been shared in over a dozen Black church groups across Georgia. It wasn't just going viral. It was going personal. Down in Tucson, Arizona, at a backyard barbecue celebrating a college graduation, the argument flared over coleslaw and ribs. Two cousins, one retired from teaching, one just starting a political science degree, clashed near the grill. "She's too loud sometimes," said Uncle Ron. "All fire, no follow-through." "She didn't say a damn thing this time, you're right," replied his niece, Myra, 22, gesturing with her Coke. "She let the clip do the talking. That's not loud. That's strategic." Uncle Ron blinked. Fair point. It was happening everywhere, across racial lines, across zip codes, across political affiliations. The shift wasn't toward party or ideology, it was toward tone, toward how you fought, why you fought, and who you never forgot while doing it. In the comments of viral videos, people started using a new phrase. She didn't raise her voice, she raised the room. Cable networks scrambled to frame it. Pundits tried to repackage it, but they were missing the quiet revolution underway, one rooted not in decibels, but in dignity. Bondi had underestimated the waitress. America hadn't. And for the first time in a long time, a generation raised to equate power with noise was remembering what real power looked like when it came wrapped in silence and walked like it had nothing left to prove. The Capitol office was quiet, unusually so. The blinds were half closed, muting the afternoon sun into long, golden streaks across the polished floor. AOC sat at her desk, the world outside her window still humming with the noise of scandal, speculation, and a million hot takes. But inside there was only the faint sound of a pen scratching on thick, cream-colored journal paper. Her father's old notebook, the one she only opened when the stakes stopped being about headlines and started being about history. She wrote slowly, letting each word settle before continuing. They've already judged her, but I'm not here to win points. I'm here to name the silence. She paused, reread the sentence, and underlined the word name. Across the room, her senior aide Lena paced with a tablet in hand. Notifications blinked constantly. Media requests, town hall invitations, opinion pieces demanding a response. The pressure wasn't subtle anymore. Even allies were calling for a public statement. Lena stopped pacing. Alex, it's everywhere now. CNN's doing a whole segment called Bondi and the Bartender. They've already framed the whole thing as a clash of personas. She's riding the wave and we're invisible. AOC didn't look up. Good. Lena blinked. I'm sorry? They can spend their energy branding the story. We'll own the ending. The rest of the team sat in a semicircle, tense, waiting. One younger staffer, barely out of grad school, finally spoke up. We could do an interview. You wouldn't have to call for resignation. Just speak from the heart. Say what it meant to people. Alexandria exhaled softly, but not out of frustration. It was empathy. She understood why they wanted her to speak. She understood why silence felt like surrender. But she wasn't silent. She was listening. Every network wants a quote, Lena added. Even Colbert's team reached out. They want you to come on just to read the transcript out loud. Their words, not yours. AOC finally set her pen down and turned to face them all. Let me ask you something, she said gently. When a man says something ugly off mic and a woman responds immediately, what happens? The room was still. She's emotional. She's hysterical. She's attention-seeking. AOC nodded. But if she waits, if she listens, if she chooses her moment with precision, then suddenly it's not drama, it's clarity. Lena leaned against the edge of the desk. So what are you waiting for? Alexandria looked her in the eyes. The chamber, that's where she'll hear me. It wasn't defiance. It was strategy. Bondi had made the mistake of thinking the battle was fought on cable news. But AOC knew better. She didn't need to perform for the internet. She'd waited tables through louder rooms. She'd campaigned on icy sidewalks to people who didn't believe change would ever knock on their door. She knew the power of timing. She turned her attention back to the journal and wrote a second line beneath the first. This isn't about punishment, it's about pattern, and whether this room will pretend not to hear it again. Outside the door, a junior staffer popped in with a nervous smile. C-SPAN just announced they'll be live streaming the next session, start to finish. AOC nodded. Perfect. She stood, smoothed her blazer, and gathered her notes. Not just the pages her team had prepped, but her own scribbled thoughts, written during the hearing and after. A collection of quotes, reminders, and questions she wanted to put not just on the record, but in the room. She didn't plan to yell. She didn't need to. That was the difference between noise and presence. One aide whispered, "You ready?" AOC answered without pause. I was ready before they even noticed I was here. As she walked out, past the spinning headlines and restless commentary, she didn't carry a prepared statement. She carried a decision. Because this wasn't the beginning of a scandal. It was the beginning of an answer. And the fire wasn't coming from rage. It was coming from a match lit carefully, after a long, intentional silence. The hearing room was full long before the gavel struck. Reporters arrived early, staking out spots along the back rail. C-SPAN had confirmed live coverage, and every major outlet had sent someone, not just the usual political correspondents, but columnists, senior editors, cultural commentators. The room buzzed, not with noise, but with the peculiar tension of people waiting for something they weren't sure they should see but couldn't afford to miss. Pam Bondi entered 5 minutes before the session resumed. Her expression was composed, chin high, a controlled half-smile stretched across her face. She wore an emerald green blazer this time, bold and intentional, as if to signal that she hadn't lost a step. Her staff trailed behind, whispering last-minute notes she didn't appear to need. She passed AOC without a glance, her heels ticking against the floor like the metronome of practiced confidence. Her chair creaked as she settled in, shifting her folder with theatrical precision before smoothing her hair back behind one ear. The gavel came down. Chairman Henderson offered a brief opening, then turned the floor over for initial statements. Bondi had requested to speak first. The cameras clicked into place. "Thank you, Mr. Chairman," Bondi began, her tone sugar-coated but unmistakably sharp. "I'd like to take a moment, before we continue with today's proceedings, to address the energy surrounding our last session." She didn't mention the clip, didn't say the word Mike, but everyone knew where she was going. "In recent days," she continued, "a certain moment, never intended for public consumption, has been circulated, decontextualized, monetized, and quite frankly, clickbaited." A few reporters exchanged glances. Bondi's eyes skimmed the room with faux warmth. "Let me be clear. I regret that anything I said caused offense. That was never my intention. But I also believe our public service is cheapened when we reduce complex hearings into sound bites and circus." She let the word circus hang in the air, daring a reaction. None came. "I entered public service to defend law, not to perform in pageants, not to trade jabs on Twitter, and certainly not to be judged by out-of-context audio posted at midnight on some YouTube channel I'd never heard of." Behind her, one of her aides shifted slightly. "That wasn't in the draft." Bondi leaned forward, elbows on the desk, perfectly framed for the cameras. "We all say things in private that we wouldn't repeat on the record. That's human, and I will not pretend to be above that." She paused. The smile came back, tight, rehearsed, almost mocking. "But I will also not apologize for having high standards for this chamber. I believe in tone, I believe in decorum, and I believe that when our roles are reduced to performance, we all lose." At that, she looked directly at AOC for the first time since the hot mic incident. Not long, just enough to send a message. "Your silence doesn't scare me." AOC, seated 2 chairs down, made no move, no raised eyebrow, no scribbled note. She simply listened, her posture calm and unaffected, her eyes unreadable. Bondi shifted back again and closed her folder, signaling the end of her remarks. Around the chamber, there was a measured silence. Not approval, not disapproval, just calculation. Chairman Henderson nodded. "Thank you, Ms. Bondi. We will now proceed with questions from members of the committee." As the hearing resumed its procedural rhythm, it was clear Bondi believed she had regained control. Her team had assured her that voters respected strength, that brushing off scandal with a dignified air of detachment would play well on cable, that the more she downplayed it, the more trivial it would seem. She didn't realize the game had already changed. She was still playing defense with the assumption that the courtroom belonged to her, that the mic had been a blip, that her words, harsh, revealing, and real, could be edited out by tone and posture. But the silence from AOC wasn't surrender. It was setup. And in the seat beside her, the Congresswoman waited. Notes in place, voice steady, fire banked. The smirk had returned, but so had the match. The shift in the room didn't come with an announcement. It came with stillness. As another committee member yielded back their time, the chairman scanned the table and paused. "Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez, you now have the floor." She didn't stand quickly. She moved deliberately, rising like someone not walking into a performance, but into a responsibility. There were no printed statements in her hands, no stacks of highlighted documents, just herself, measured, grounded, unshaken. Even the cameras adjusted, instinctively zooming in. The murmurs stopped. Across from her, Pam Bondi's eyes flickered briefly, not in panic, but in calculation. She tilted her head slightly, curious. She had seen this before, hadn't she? The freshman congresswoman with the firebrand reputation, the viral speaker, the clip machine, the political theater she thought she understood. But AOC didn't begin with fire. She began with calm. They say microphones amplify voices, she said, her voice level but resonant. But sometimes they just reveal what we never wanted to admit. Silence, no reaction. Just those words settling into the paneling like dust that refused to be brushed away. She continued, "In this chamber, we often talk about what is said publicly, on the record. But power rarely operates that way. It doesn't shout. It assumes. It whispers when it thinks no one is listening. And sometimes it forgets the mic is still on." She didn't look at Bondi. She didn't need to. The words moved like a slow tide, undeniable in their motion. "I could offer a response," she said. "I could quote articles, cite emails, defend my background, or remind this body what it means to serve with humility." A pause. "But instead, I'll let someone else speak, someone who already did." She turned slightly, nodding to a staffer seated at the far end of the dais. They tapped a button. The room didn't know what to expect. Another clip from the news? A quote from the internet? Number it was the clip. "Let her rant. They love it when the waitress acts like she runs the place." Pam Bondi's voice filled the chamber. Clear, unedited, flat and cold in its delivery. The same voice that had, just minutes earlier, spoken of tone and professionalism. Some shifted in their seats. One aide lowered their eyes. The room didn't gasp, because gasps are for shock. And this wasn't shock. This was confirmation. The clip ended. The silence after was even louder. AOC didn't speak immediately. She let the weight of the words sit there, uninterrupted, unsoftened. Then, with the same calm she began with, she said, "These weren't my words. I didn't take them out of context. I didn't edit them. I didn't even repeat them. I just let them be heard." She scanned the room now, not looking for confrontation, but for acknowledgement. There are people watching this who were never surprised. People who have waited tables, cleaned floors, taught night school, or ridden the bus in scrubs before sunrise, and they heard something familiar in those words. Not because they hadn't heard them before, but because they've spent lifetimes pretending they didn't. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. The clarity did the work. This moment is not about me. It's not about my resume, or my title, or even my dignity. It's about the millions of people whose stories get reduced to footnotes, to punchlines, to reminders that they should stay in their place. Another pause. No one moved. I will not respond with insult. I will not escalate, because what was said is enough. With that, she returned to her seat. Not with flourish, not with applause, just silence. But it wasn't emptiness, it was impact. On camera, Pam Bondi remained still, but her fingers pressed tighter around her pen, the green blazer suddenly sharper against her posture. She blinked twice, looked forward, then down. The chairman adjusted his microphone, cleared his throat, but no one really heard what came next, because in that room, for that moment, there was nothing else left to say. The clip ended, but the air in the chamber didn't resume. It held, tight, waiting for a cue that didn't come. There was no rustle of papers, no throat clearing, no polite shuffling to break the moment. Just silence, thick, unmoving, almost sacred. The kind of silence that doesn't come from confusion, but from recognition, from knowing you've just witnessed something that can't be spun. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez remained standing, calm, unmoved. Her hands rested gently on the edge of the podium, her expression composed, unreadable. She looked around the room once, not seeking affirmation, just ensuring it had truly landed. Then she said, with unflinching quiet, She said it. I just let you hear it. That was all. One sentence. No anger, no drama, just the undeniable, unvarnished truth, left to sit in the room like smoke from a candle that had just gone out. And still, no one breathed. Across the dais, a Republican member adjusted his collar. One aide glanced at their tablet as if doing so might transport them to somewhere safer, less raw. Behind the press rail, a camera operator whispered, "Jesus!" A younger staffer wiped her cheek, though no one had noticed she'd started to tear up. Bondi's face had changed. The smirk was gone, replaced by something more dangerous, rigidity. Her lips pressed into a flat line. The muscle at her jaw ticked once, then again. She shifted in her seat and leaned toward her microphone. "Chairman," she began, her voice sharper than usual. But before she could continue, Chairwoman Denise Gallagher, presiding in place of Henderson for this session, raised her hand without looking up. "Motion denied," she said firmly, her eyes still focused on the papers in front of her. Bondi blinked. "I haven't even—" "You are not recognized at this time," Chairwoman Gallagher repeated, her voice even but final. The Congresswoman yielded the floor with no questions. "We will now proceed." Bondi leaned back, eyes narrowed, nostrils flaring slightly. The cameras caught it all. AOC sat again, folding her hands neatly in her lap, never once glancing at Bondi. She didn't need to. The room had already absorbed the truth, and the cameras had broadcast the rest. In that moment, no rebuttal could land. No statement could undo what was heard, because what stung wasn't the insult, it was the familiarity. Millions of Americans had grown up with that voice, that tone, that dismissal dressed up as civility, and now it had a face, a name, a timestamp. Outside the chamber, Twitter had erupted before the clip even finished airing. The quote, "She said it, I just let you hear it," was already trending. Someone had turned it into a graphic overlaid on a photo of AOC, standing alone at the podium, eyes steady, spine straight. Another added it to footage of Rosa Parks refusing to move. A TikTok creator stitched it into a montage of workers, nurses, janitors, cashiers, silently watching the moment unfold from break rooms and parked cars. But inside the chamber, the energy was something else. Bondi gripped the sides of her chair, her composure cracked just enough for those who knew her to recognize it. Her aide passed her a note. She didn't read it. To her left, a senator known for his detachment leaned back and murmured to a colleague. She didn't even raise her voice. At the rear of the chamber, Chairwoman Gallagher's aide leaned over and whispered, "Should we recess?" Gallagher shook her head. "No, let it hang." And it did. Even as the session resumed with procedural jargon and prepared witness statements, the echo of that moment remained untouched. Every word that followed felt thinner, flatter, mere air after thunder. AOC didn't speak again for the rest of the hearing. She didn't need to. Because in an institution built on noise, on performance, on rhetorical duels and practice deflections, she had done something far more unforgettable. She'd let the silence say everything. And for once, Capitol Hill listened, not because it chose to, but because it had no choice. Pam Bondi left the chamber with her teeth clenched behind a pressed smile. She didn't speak to reporters. She didn't glance sideways. Her heels clicked hard against the marble, echoing down the hallway like punctuation marks to a sentence she hadn't meant to end. Her aides flanked her, whispering urgently, but she waved them off. "Draft a rebuttal," she muttered. "We're not letting them own this narrative." Within the hour, her office released a statement to the media. The subject line read, "Statement on audio manipulation and media targeting." It was blunt, defensive, and desperate. The recent resurfacing and re-editing of a private comment, captured without consent, is part of a coordinated leftist tech sabotage campaign. Political opponents are weaponizing surveillance to distort context and distract from real policy issues. I remain committed to serving with integrity. Cable networks ran the statement within minutes, mostly with raised eyebrows. CNN brought on a media analyst who immediately dismissed the claim of manipulation. "The audio's clear. No cut, no edit. She said what she said." But the problem wasn't just the pundits. It was the people who used to work for her. That same evening, a tweet appeared from an account with the blue check mark of verified credibility, and the signature tone of someone no longer afraid. I interned for Pam Bondi in 2021. She called me and two others diversity window dressing during a private donor event. I never forgot it. I just stayed quiet. The tweet had fewer than 200 likes in the first hour. Then a second intern quote retweeted it. She said I was well-spoken for a state school applicant. Thought it was a compliment. Now I know better. The thread exploded. Screenshots from old emails surfaced. Nothing damning alone, but collectively unsettling. Phrases like optics considerations, good for photo ops, and balance the color on stage began to feel heavier, harder to explain away. Pam's comms director tried to respond, first with silence, then with spin. We're disappointed in the politicization of former relationships, the team wrote in a now-deleted reply. These were educational roles, not long-term staff. The delete made it worse. Overnight, #window dressing began trending, not because it was funny, because it felt familiar. For people who had once been the token, the checkbox, the seat filler in a room they were never meant to speak in, the phrase became a rallying cry. On LinkedIn, a former staffer from Bondi's Gubernatorial Exploratory Committee wrote a long post. I spent a year writing speeches she barely glanced at. Once she told me to remove every word over 3 syllables because working-class voters get lost easy. I left politics after that. The post went viral, shared by political writers, career advisors, and educators across the country. In comments, professionals told their own stories, some about Bondi, most not. But the theme was unmistakable. The face of power talking down when it thought no one was listening. And then the quietest shift came, quiet but fatal. Donors began pulling support. The PAC, affiliated with 3 Florida-based real estate developers, quietly removed Bondi's photo from their featured profiles. A fundraising gala scheduled for next quarter was postponed indefinitely. An internal email from one law firm read, "In the light of recent controversy, we advise re-evaluation of all public alignment. No public condemnation. No dramatic statements. Just doors closing one by one." By Friday, Bondi's team scheduled a podcast interview to tell her side, but the host canceled last minute, citing unexpected rescheduling conflicts. Translation: we're not risking it. In private, her aides were unraveling. One junior staffer quit via text. Another ghosted entirely. The communications director, once her most loyal defender, started forwarding job applications to think tanks. Inside Bondi's inner circle, frustration turned inward. She blamed tech companies. She blamed interns. She even blamed her own recording mic, demanding to know why the light hadn't been covered. But deep down she knew. The mic hadn't betrayed her. Her own words had. And what had once been her shield, her poise, her practiced tone, her command of rooms, was now the very thing that turned against her. Because when the mask cracked, people didn't see an outlier. They saw a pattern. And this time, the public wasn't looking away. The envelope was cream-colored and unassuming, its edges a little worn from handling. It had no return address, just a carefully handwritten line in black ink. For Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. It arrived tucked between reports and committee memos, slipped in by a mail clerk who'd noticed something different about the way it was sealed. Like someone had taken their time, like someone still believed letters could carry more than ink. AOC opened it quietly, seated alone in her office late in the evening. The sky outside had dimmed into the soft blues of an early spring dusk. Most of her staff had gone home. The only sound was the low hum of a desk fan and the gentle creak of her old leather chair. The letter began simply, "Dear Congresswoman, my name is Robert Lindell. I'm 98 years old. I served in the U.S. Navy from 1943 to 1946. I buried too many friends overseas to waste words now." AOC's fingers paused briefly. She kept reading. "I've voted in every election since 1948. I've seen presidents fall and rise, wars begin and end, and I've heard more political speeches than I can count. I thought I'd seen enough of history. Turns out I hadn't heard enough of it. When I listened to what that woman said about you, about being a waitress acting like she runs the place, I didn't feel offended. I felt regret. because I realized how often I've sat quiet in rooms where voices like yours weren't welcome. I didn't say those words, but I've let them pass before. Too many times. AOC swallowed hard. So this isn't just an apology, it's a thank you. For saying nothing, when saying everything would have been easier. For letting us hear it for ourselves. For trusting that even old men like me could still learn something new. With respect, Robert Lindell, Emporia, Kansas. She read it again, then a third time. Not because she didn't understand it, but because something about it carried weight, the kind that doesn't just sit on your chest but settles in your spine. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't viral, but it was real. And in a week full of noise, it was the first thing that felt purely human. She reached for her journal, her father's old leather-bound one, the one she kept in a drawer no one else opened. The pages were filled with scribbles, quotes, observations from late nights and long hearings. Somewhere between a diary and a ledger of emotional truth. She slipped the letter in carefully, placing it beside an older note she'd copied during her first campaign. A quote from Cornell West. "Justice is what love looks like in public." It had always struck her as almost too poetic for politics, but now holding Robert's letter, she saw it differently. Justice wasn't just protest or policy or pushing back. Sometimes it was restraint. Sometimes it was standing still while the world spun out and letting truth land without interference. She underlined the quote again. Outside the window, the Capitol dome glowed under the pale evening sky. Streetlights flickered on, and the last of the tourists disappeared beyond the barricades. Her phone buzzed twice, news alerts about Bondi's fundraising collapse, and another anonymous intern going on record. But AOC didn't pick it up. Not yet. Instead, she sat back in her chair and let the silence stretch. Because that letter, just a piece of paper from Kansas, meant more than any trending hashtag. It meant that something had shifted, not just in media, not just in politics, but in memory. A 98-year-old veteran had watched a young congresswoman say nothing and heard everything. And maybe that was the breakthrough. Not the headlines, not the hearings, but the quiet recognition from people who'd lived long enough to see history repeat and were finally ready to hear it differently. She closed the journal, rested her hand over its spine, and whispered softly to no one at all. "Thank you, Robert. I heard you too." By Friday evening, the country had become a conversation, not a shouting match, not a viral scream, but an actual rolling, slow-burning discussion. From cable news segments to barbershop debates, from Facebook threads in Wisconsin diners to porch chats in Mississippi, people weren't just reacting, they were reflecting. The airwaves, once dominated by outrage cycles and political insults, carried a different energy now. Less adrenaline, more consideration. The first spark lit on the morning seat, a daytime talk show usually known for celebrity gossip and cooking tips. But that day, the hosts opened with a clip. Not of a fight, but of AOC's single sentence. She said it. I just let you hear it. One host, a former prosecutor from Detroit, leaned in as the screen faded to black. I've been in a lot of rooms where people try to control the narrative. She didn't. She trusted the truth. That takes more strength than most people understand. The audience clapped, not wildly, but steadily, like they'd just been reminded of something they forgot they believed in. Later that afternoon on Talk of the South, a regional radio call-in show based in Jackson, Mississippi, the host played the hot mic recording again, uncut, unpolished. Then he opened the lines. The first caller was a retired nurse named Evelyn from Meridian. She didn't raise her voice, Evelyn said. She didn't even call that woman out. She just showed us. And somehow, that said more to me than any speech I've ever heard. By nightfall, AOC wasn't trending for what she'd done. She was trending for what she hadn't. Hashtag quiet power climbed past the usual political noise. Commentators tried to coin terms like silent civility or the dignity strategy. But the people watching weren't interested in spin. They were interested in something that felt rare. In a Chicago barbershop, 5 men sat in a circle, the football game on mute in the background. One held a phone, playing the video for the 3rd time. A younger guy shook his head and said, "If it were me, I would have snapped. Gone off. No way I'd let that slide. An older man in his 60s leaned forward. That's why it worked, son. She didn't need to match her. She let her hang herself with her own words. That ain't weakness. That's what my mom used to call quiet thunder. In Appleton, Wisconsin, an electrician named Hank posted a long Facebook status. He wasn't a regular political poster. His feed was usually filled with fishing trips, grandkids, and engine rebuilds. But on that Friday he wrote, I didn't vote for AOC, might never. But damn if she didn't show more self-control than most men I've met in Congress. She could have gone viral. She went silent. And somehow that said more. The post was shared over 20,000 times. In Phoenix, a group of retired teachers gathered at a community center. They were discussing lesson plans for Constitution Week, but the topic kept drifting back. One of them, Carol, said, if I were still teaching high school civics, I'd show that clip. Not to talk about parties, but to talk about presence. She modeled something we've lost. The shift wasn't about who supported which party. It was about who recognized power when it didn't need to announce itself. Bondi had become a footnote in her own scandal, still spiraling, still issuing statements, still calling it a setup. But the narrative had moved on, because no one was arguing whether she had said the words. That debate had ended. Now people were talking about why it hit so hard, why it felt so familiar. Because the truth was, America hadn't been stunned by what Bondi said. It had been stunned by how clearly it recognized her voice. Not her literal voice, but the voice of every boardroom, back hallway, and whispered comment that treated dignity as a performance instead of a birthright. And AOC, she hadn't claimed victory. She hadn't taken a victory lap. She just went back to work. And in doing so, she reminded a restless, noisy country that sometimes the strongest microphone isn't the loudest one. It's the one that lets the truth echo all by itself. And that was the conversation. Not about fire, not about fury, but about the quiet return of something America had nearly forgotten how to trust: character. The Monday morning CSPAN call-in line sounded different. Gone were the usual debates over budget items or partisan blame games. In their place were the voices of older Americans, measured, unwavering, and brimming with something the hosts hadn't heard in a while: clarity. I'm 74 years old, the first caller began, her voice trembling only slightly. And I've lived through 12 presidents. But what I saw in that hearing wasn't politics. It was grace under fire. We need more women like her, not less. Another caller, this time from Ohio, chimed in moments later. I was a teacher for 35 years. I've seen every kind of student, every kind of argument. What AOC did, that wasn't silence. That was discipline. She didn't take the bait. She waited, and then she let the truth do the talking. In Arkansas, an 81-year-old woman named Doris waited patiently on the line before saying softly, she didn't scream. She didn't rant. She reminded us of what it looks like when someone walks into a room and doesn't shrink. The host nodded, clearly moved. The switchboard was full. Most were over 60. Some mentioned the war years. Others referenced Dr. King. All of them, in one way or another, echoed the same message. They weren't just proud of what AOC did. They were grateful. Grateful that in a time of noise, someone had chosen to speak with restraint. Grateful that the mic had stayed on, not just to expose ugliness, but to reveal something quieter, stronger, and desperately needed. And in their voices, across age and distance, one thing was clear. The elders were not just watching, they were standing. The lights were hot under the CNN studio canopy, but Pam Bondi was colder than ever. She sat upright in the interview chair, hands folded perfectly on her lap, a practiced smile painted in place. The segment had started smoothly. Questions about ethics, partisan gridlock, the usual DC deflection points. But then, just 6 minutes in, the anchor tilted her head and said with practiced neutrality, before we let you go, just one quick question. If you had the chance, would you take back what you said into that hot mic about Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez? The pause was immediate and fatal. Bondi's lips tightened. Her eyes flicked to the off-camera producer. We agreed not to bring that up. The anchor raised an eyebrow. It's already public record, ma'am. Just a reaction. On the record. For a second, Bondi held the moment like a chess piece hovering above a losing board. Then she unclipped her mic, stood abruptly and snapped, "We're done here." No thank you, no handshake. Just the hard clack of heels and the stunned silence of a studio crew frozen in place. 30 minutes later, the real damage hit, not from the broadcast but from inside her own team. An anonymous staffer leaked a screenshot of her post-interview text message. "Why is she still winning?" I said it off camera. The message spread like wildfire, not just because of what it said, but because of what it meant. She still didn't get it, still thought the issue was visibility, not value. And across the internet, one phrase echoed louder than the rest. "The mic doesn't care where you think the camera ends." The folding chairs were mismatched. The coffee in the back was lukewarm. The fluorescent lights flickered just enough to be noticed, but not enough to fix. It wasn't a glamorous setting, just a church basement in Queens with creaky floors and a borrowed microphone. That was how AOC wanted it. There were no banners, no press gaggle, just a few dozen constituents, most of them older, some in union jackets, others in quiet cardigans. They came with questions about housing, public transit, prescription drug prices. Not one person mentioned the hearing until the final hand went up. An older woman in a dark green raincoat stood, her voice clear but gentle. "You never responded to what she said," "but it sure felt like you won." AOC paused, then offered a faint smile, but it wasn't one of triumph. "This wasn't a win," she said softly, scanning the room. "This was a mirror." She let the words hang. "I didn't say what she said. I didn't twist it. I didn't even answer it. I just let people see it for themselves. And what they saw, what we saw, wasn't new. It was familiar." She folded her hands in front of her. "If that helped people feel heard or seen, then I'm grateful. But I didn't win anything. I just stood still long enough for something ugly to reflect back." No applause followed, just nods, because they understood. In a week full of headlines and reaction, what lingered wasn't outrage. It was truth, unadorned, uncomfortable, and undeniable. And Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez had no interest in parades. She was already walking toward the next fight. The office was quiet again, not in the way it had been before the storm, but in the way that follows it, when the winds have settled, but the ground still remembers being shaken. The headlines had begun to drift elsewhere. The networks were cycling into newer stories. But in her corner of Capitol Hill, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez moved with the same deliberate rhythm as always. She reached into the drawer of her desk and pulled out the familiar weight, her father's old leather notebook. The corners were scuffed, the spines soft from years of folding. Inside were fragments of speeches never given, thoughts never tweeted, and names of people who had reminded her why she fought in the first place. She opened to a fresh page and gently slipped in the handwritten letter from Robert Lindell, the World War II veteran from Kansas whose words had echoed deeper than any headline. She folded it once, then pressed it flat between two pages like a pressed flower being preserved for history. Above it, she wrote slowly in pen, the ink settling into the grain of the paper. "Truth needs no permission to exist." She underlined it. Twice. It wasn't about slogans. It wasn't about strategy. It was about memory and the responsibility to carry it, to record the moments that didn't go viral but changed everything anyway. She closed the journal and rested her hand on its cover for a moment longer than usual. Not everything had to be said aloud. Some truths just had to be written down, so they wouldn't be lost, so they wouldn't be denied, so they could live, quietly, persistently, in the hands of those who never asked for power but carried it anyway. The auditorium lights were soft, casting a golden glow over the folding chairs and high school banners that lined the walls. It wasn't a press event, just a community conversation, one of the stops AOC made quietly, without press, without cameras, just connection. She stood in front of a group of students from diverse neighborhoods, many of them first generation, some still unsure how to pronounce Congresswoman with confidence. They had listened politely to the talk on civic duty, but it was during the open Q&A that the moment shifted. A teenage girl in the third row raised her hand, hesitated, then stood with both hands clenched around her phone. Her voice trembled. "How do you speak when you're scared. The room went still, not because it was dramatic, but because it was honest. The kind of question that didn't seek applause, only truth. AOC took a breath. Then she walked closer, not to the podium, but to the girl. "You speak," she said gently, "with what you've lived." Her voice didn't rise, but it didn't waver either. "Not with what people expect or what they'll approve of. You speak with the nights your mom cried quietly in the kitchen, with the hours you studied in a room too loud to concentrate, with the moments someone looked through you, and you remembered it." The girl nodded, blinking fast. AOC smiled, then added, "That's louder than any mic, and more lasting than any applause." And in that moment, among folding chairs and restless youth, it became clear. This wasn't just a story about political power. It was about how you pass it forward, not by shouting, but by showing someone they already have a voice, waiting. The camera drifts through the empty congressional chamber, lit only by dim overheads and the soft amber glow of reading lamps left on by habit. Papers are stacked neatly. Nameplates glint faintly in the silence. The chairs, once filled with tension, posturing, history, sit still, waiting for tomorrow. The lens moves slowly past the podium where no one stands now. Just a microphone, centered, motionless, and yet somehow still echoing. AOC's voice enters, soft but unwavering, as if spoken not just to the room, but to the country watching from its own quiet places. They thought they controlled the mic, thought it was something you turned on and off depending on who was speaking. But it was never theirs. A pause. It belongs to the people who still choose to listen. The screen cuts to slow-motion flashes of earlier moments. AOC standing at the podium without notes. Bondi's frozen face as the clip plays. The handwritten letter from the veteran in Kansas slipping into the journal. The girl in the school auditorium, head bowed in thought. Then back to the mic, still there, still on. The screen fades to black, no music, just breath and silence. Then text fades in, white on black. The mic was never off. You just weren't listening before. A few seconds more of silence. Then slowly, the closing sound of a chair being pulled back echoes faintly, like someone's coming to take their seat. And maybe, this time, they'll be heard. This story isn't just about a hot mic. It's about the quiet power of choosing dignity over drama. AOC's strength came not from what she shouted, but from what she let others hear. In a world addicted to noise, she reminded us that silence can carry truth, and restraint can roar louder than rage. What resonates most is that real leadership isn't always about dominating the room. It's about knowing when to stand still and let others reveal themselves. What do you think is more powerful today? Being loud or being clear? If this story touched you, don't let it stop here. Like, share, and subscribe to Alexandria Rising Stories, where every voice matters and every story echoes far beyond the screen. This story is a fictionalized and dramatized narrative created for educational, inspirational, and storytelling purposes. While it may be inspired by real public events, people, or societal issues, it includes imagined dialogue, reconstructed scenes, and character interpretations meant to highlight broader themes of justice, dignity, and resilience. Any resemblance to actual events or individuals beyond public knowledge is purely coincidental. We do not intend to defame, mislead, or harm, but to invite reflection and meaningful conversation. Thank you for watching Alexandria Rising Stories.